Welcome to Powerboat Talk, the podcast where we talk everything performance boats with your host, Joe Road.
Before we get started today, I wanted to give a quick shout out to some companies that are helping to support our fast boat community. This episode is sponsored by West Coast River Outlaws. West Coast River Outlaws is a fast-growing media and marine services company built around supporting people who love fast boats. They create epic content and run an online retail hub. And they've also officially opened their repair and service shop in Arlington, Texas. Whether you need a new boat, help with a project, or action shots on the water, connect with them. You can find West Coast River Outlaws on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at WCRO Media or online at westcoastriveroutlaws.com. Hello and welcome to Powerboat Talk. Today, my very special, as always, guest is Mr. Dave Villwock, who is Unlimited Hydroplane Racing's arguably most successful driver in history. And actually, Dave just got elected to the Motorsports Hall of Fame. So we've got some really cool stuff to talk about. Very privileged to have him. And Dave, thanks for coming on this morning and taking the time to talk.
Happy to do so. It should be fun.
Yeah, so we'll give it a try. I'll do my best. So, hey, so Motorsports Hall of Fame? I mean, that kind of right. I mean, boat racing is always looking for its I guess due, right? I mean, it's always been a little bit of the underdog and not quite as big as auto racing. So, I mean, what's it mean to be included in that group of people, Motorsports Hall, the greatest drivers from every aspect of motor racing?
I think what's cool about that is the West of the world in motorsport is giving us some respect, in that these things are, these boats that we're racing, they're an exercise of excess. They're something that looks in the picture frame a lot like an Indy car. When people get next to it, they find out that it's 30 feet long and it's 14 feet wide and it has the equivalent of like 4 IndyCar engines in it that, it makes 3,000 to 5,000 horsepower, and so, and actually the drivers, when they get into it, when they make the step up from limited classes and other forms of boat racing, they get into those things and they go, oh my God, I had no idea. And then they go out in the race course. It's okay in qualifying. It looks like regular water. And then they get out in a race with 6 boats and go, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? And so they're a celebration of excess. And to be respected amongst and to be inducted with people like Dale Earnhardt Jr., which is another story. I helped Dale Earnhardt Jr. get into the big leagues in NASCAR. And, that was fun, and that's its own story. But to be inducted with him and the people like Sammy Swindell, who have watched, race sprint cars forever, that's a special thing. And so that, although I don't look for that stuff really, I'm still racing boats and I'm still doing the things like Toby Keith says, don't let the old man in, and I heard that. I didn't even know it was a Toby Keith song. It was John Force who was told by one of his crew chiefs that he said, don't let the old man in, John. Just don't worry about it. Don't let the old man in. You can still do this with any of them, and then that's followed by don't count the old man out. Because, in that song, after I listened to the song, when people reference that, I went, it really says it all. It says, don't let the old man in. And it says, don't count him out. And he says, I may not be what I once was, but I'm as good once as I ever was. and I think we've shown that here. We've got a group of great people with this Apollo race team and the BWR racing. We've got an awful lot of talent put together, and that's one thing that's, the teams that we're drawn together with and the equipment that's drawn together. There's an awful lot of experience there. I think I said once, I don't know what the number really is, but with the people that are there in the shop, myself and Andrew Tate, they probably won every championship or Gold Cup, probably won 95% of every championship or Gold Cup in the last 25 years. Mm-hmm. So that feels good that there's that sort of a talent base around there, that you're not sort of doing things on your own. And that's what I spent about the last 10 years, just trying to help boat teams that were struggling get going again, get their boats set up, get them in the game. And that's been fun too. Haven't really focused as much on racing as just trying to get the boats and the teams up and running and up to a championship level.
Mm-hmm.
So being back in my old shop, the Budweiser shop, with all the tools there and the same sort of people, it's really an interesting dynamic. I was sitting in a Penske's bus at Portland Raceway where he was running Indy cars that weekend, and we were talking about personnel and how important people were to these organizations, as they are to every business. I think that's one thing that Bruce Ratchford really understands. He's in a specialty sheet metal area that I was when I worked, and he understands how very important it is to keep talented people engaged. It's your whole game is to keep that talent base, that tribal knowledge, if you will, of what it takes to be a winner in any one endeavor. So I'm sitting in that bus with Roger, and we're talking about teams and people, and he looks up at me, looking through the top of his glass. He says, "Isn't it interesting that people that work hard often get lucky?"
And it's amazing how you can make your own luck, right?
And is that true? And he's another guy like Bruce Ratchford, Penske is, that you watch him, he seeks out people. When somebody closes an operation, he doesn't pirate people from other teams, but he waits for people to change or contracts to change with drivers and people. And when they become available, he goes, "Hey, take a look at us." And the next thing you know, Roger's putting another chip into that bank that makes him head and shoulders above the rest. And Bernie did the same thing. And now I'm watching Bruce do the same thing. It's interesting to sit back and watch over these decades of these great leaders approach motorsport. And so this year should be fun to watch.
What did you get from like guys like Rick and guys like Penske and Bernie Little, obviously, who you just mentioned, but what's something, obviously you got a lot of race knowledge from those guys, but what's something did you get outside of the race course, like a life lesson, or what's something you really took away from those guys?
I think just what I'm talking about.
The people,
something that heck, when I got into motorsports, I really didn't want to. I was running large sheet metal shops, had a lot of people and having success there, and I could fly my model airplanes, RC model airplanes, and I could race boats in the limited area. Yeah, but I could do it at the Budweiser level. So life was pretty good if I didn't screw it up. And so when people came knocking the door to get involved in unlimited racing, I wasn't so sure about that. But really, outside of the racing world, I had guys like Bill Bennett that was involved. He was the CEO of Circus Enterprises, and he asked me to do him a favor and take a look at his shop and come down there and tell him what he needed to do. And I thought, it got to be a free. He owned a Circus Hobbies at the time, so I'm thinking to myself, there's got to be a free model airplane radio or something in this, right? And so I said, so the answer has to be yes. So I go down and I look around. I tell him what he needs to do, and Hanauer was the driver at the time, and so I told him, and he says, well, great. He says, but, you said you fly model airplanes. I got this ranch out here and a guy that builds airplanes for me every Saturday, and this was on a Saturday. We go out and fly these model airplanes. So I go out and I spend the day with him, and about 2 or 3 o'clock. He says, well, I'm getting a little tired. He said, Donnie here will take you to the hangar, and, thanks for coming down and doing this. And he goes and he gets in his car, and meanwhile, we're loading up some model airplanes into this fella's van that worked for him. And he came by in his car and he rolled down the windows and he says, he says, I kind of like you. He says, you ought to reconsider that offer I made you, where he hadn't said anything about boat racing the whole day, but he put that in there. And I'm riding home on his private jet from Vegas to Washington State, which I'd never been on a private jet before. And I'm thinking to myself, I said, I always said I wouldn't do this because it wasn't being done the same way that Bernie Little and Budweiser approached it, and I could do that with my limited boats, but I didn't see a path that I could do that with unlimiteds. So it wasn't very attractive. But on my way home, I thought to myself, you'd be a coward if you didn't give this some thought and to see what Mr. Bennett thinks about that. So I gave it what I call the 24 hours brain soak to come up with a reason not to make that call. And I couldn't. And so I said to myself, okay, I'm going to call Bill Bennett. And I call him up and I says, I thought about what you said. And I'd be a coward if I didn't offer to put together a 3-year program to get you from where you are, which is one boat was broken in two from a crash and didn't have a safety cell or a safety cell that was built the way it should be. It didn't have a lot of things. They had a lot of motors, of which they only had like a half of one good one around there. And so they had lots of problems. So I called him up and I says, would you like me to put together a 3-year program that gets you from where you are is broken and not competitive to beaten Budweiser? And he says, oh, hell, I've been trying to get somebody to do that for years. He says, I'd love for you to do that. And he said, and put in whatever you need in there. So I go, okay. And so he said, I'll call the shop and tell them to open it up for you so you can go do whatever you want to do there. And so I do that. It was on a weekend, of course. And I called him up and I says, hey, I got this proposal ready. You want me to send it to your office? Or, what would you like to do? He says, you got a fax machine? The internet wasn't.
Right.
This was in 1988.
Yeah, that was the internet.
Yeah, right. He said, you got a fax machine? I says, yeah. And he says, well, fax it here. I'll give me the number. Here's the fax number at my house. And I send it over to him. About 5 minutes later, he calls back and says, you got a deal. When can you go to work? And I sort of went, well, I guess I'm in professional racing now, I guess. Yeah. I got to go tell a lot of people that life is changing.
Wow.
And so we do that. And so being around people like that, and he was a mentor. When he stopped racing 2 years later, he says, well, I think we'd won the championship. We'd innovated a lot of things, like the shapes of boats. We were one of the first to run a C engine. We fathered a CNC propeller program that nobody had done at the time. And we got all that done in about 5 months. And we came out and we were going fast. And we were leading the points, and then Chip crashes in New York. And but we're still fast. We have to rebuild that boat, which we do in 6 weeks, and go on to San Diego, California, to set what was then a record at 168 miles an hour. So the first year was good. The next year we won the championship, and Bennett says, I think I'll quit while I'm ahead. He said, I want to sell everything there, but you're going to come work for me. And so that started a couple of years of mentorship that he taught me a lot of things. We ran a lot of different businesses and learned a lot of things. And then one day, and here's a story that's the truth. I'm down there. I'm going to run the Luxor Hotel. It's coming up out of the ground. Bennett's told me to go down to Laughlin. I'm going to run the Colorado Bell for a while to get to run the Luxor when it gets going. As part of the getting approved by the Gaming Commission and whatnot. So I'm in the middle of that, and I get a call from Ron Jones Jr., who had taught me boat building. I'd worked with them and building a limited boat, and so I had a great relationship with them over the years. And I'd worked on a lot of the safety cells because I was a fabricator, and some of the things that they did, some of the specialty things, I'd went down and helped them, and they were mentors to me as well. Ron Jones Jr. and Sr. with matriarchs in the development and design of hydroplanes. And
sure.
And so Ron Jones Jr. calls me up and says, hey, I got this new design. It's 2-wing. And you're probably the only guy that could test it for me. Could you come up here to Seattle, and we're going to get this boat done. We've built it in 90 days, and I got Mitch Evans to drive it, but would you come test it?
Now at this point, you've never been in an Unlimited before, have you? Did you ever do any test time in the circus boat?
I tested. I was sort of the backup guy for Chip, and I've tested. And I don't think I was totally qualified yet as a driver. It used to be a lot more difficult.
And just so we're all aware too, so when you took the job with Bennett with Circus, you were crew chief. So those 3 years you were crew chief. Okay, so Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and actually, and here's the truth of that issue. When I said, okay, I'm going to be the crew chief, and then they're negotiating with Hanauer about his pay and what he was going to do. Bennett was, I wasn't. And I got a call from Bennett one evening, and he says, well, I'm having trouble with this. Why don't you just drive the boat? And I had to, I hadn't even been to all of the race courses that were there. I had driven a lot of race boats and set lots of records and won lots of national champions and all that, but I had not driven that type of a boat, and didn't, and would say, and I told him, I says, Mr. Bennett, I haven't even been to most of these race courses. I don't know what they look like. I got to learn a lot of stuff. I says, you hired me to win a championship. this is the guy. Just pay that guy. I don't know what that is, and you guys work that out, but this is the guy. And that was another mentor where Chip taught me a lot of things about how to approach a race, what to do and when to do, and where different points of the race courses at most of the places that we have, what water is like, and just a lot of things. I use one example. Like I said, Chip, you're going to go for the inside. We're in Detroit. First time we'd been there in 1989. He goes, he says, inside's a good place to be because that first big turn is there. But when you get down to the little one, you better make sure you can be in the lead, because if you're not, you're in big trouble. And so you learn, some of the yin and yang of things about how to approach a race.
Now, you said you weren't that familiar with this racing. How did you know Chip was the guy?
I'd known him Chip had won a lot of races by then. And I'd watched him in limited racing. And, that was part of what him and Fran Muncie, who got me involved, they were saying, hey, why don't you call, would you like to meet with Mr. Bennett? And like I said, I was kind of, I don't know. And, but then he called me, 8:00 at night and introduced himself as little like getting a call from Bill Gates, or Elon Musk, and said, hey, I hear you're not that interested, how can I change your mind?
Yeah. You just made the call. That changed my mind, right?
Yeah. And so Chip, I knew, was a great driver. And, I've said that, like, one of the guys I was working with that's working on the Apollo team right now, his name is Dan Walters. I told him one day when we're struggling with someone else that's driving the boat. And I said, Dan, one of the things we've always had great drivers, through a 20-year span. So somebody that's not quite to that level yet, you have to understand that one thing, people who criticize Chip and the people have criticized me, but there's a lot of knowledge there and things that some of the best do that others don't or haven't learned yet. And that's a difficult path. But I knew he was the guy that, and I wasn't thinking about learning, but I just knew that he knew more than I did about how to approach different race sites and whatnot. And so lucky for me, that came together.
Yeah. So now you got Ron Jones with this new, and wasn't it kind of, I don't want to say experimental, but kind of a different boat or some different ideas in it?
Yeah, it was a two-wing design, and we were chasing that, and I was part of that with the Jones family, looking at different designs, trying to get better pitch stability. We didn't really know at that point in time, we didn't really know how much the boats yawed or slipped sideways. And so when you design something like that, and if the boat is yawing sideways 45 degrees, which they are in places like Detroit and Madison, the tunnel that would trap air shuts off its own air because it's at such a high angle that it can't support itself. And so it induces a lot of drag. And so while that design worked very well for me to win as my first race in San Diego, it didn't work well in Madison or Detroit and other places.
Oh, okay.
It was specific to a certain type of course. And, most teams haven't got the capability to have so many boats that they could have one that's designed for each race course. And I don't know if you were the only guy to ever do that, but you won your very first Unlimited race as a driver in that boat. Right.
But now, did you know going in that there was going to be limitations with that boat on other courses?
No, we didn't know. That was part of the story is that, like I say, Ron Jones Jr. called me up and said, hey, would you come up and test the boat? And so I said, well, I can't get this till Friday. And he goes, well, we're probably not going to be done till Friday anyway, so that's okay. So I fly up, we run the boat. JR and I effect some changes to it. After the first day we ran it, we added some things on it, and Bitch went and drove the boat through the race and left town there going, yeah, well, I think here's the direction to go, and went back down and got ready to run a casino again. And a couple of weeks pass, and Ron Jones Jr. calls me up again and says, hey, I got this sponsor, Coors Dry, that wants to sponsor a boat at San Diego. If we make all the changes you talked about, would you like to drive it there? And I said, well, I can't get there till Friday at my day job, but yeah, I can get over there. And so we go over there and we run conservatively because he didn't have much equipment and stuff. And so we save it sort of for the final and go out and win the final, And of course, I hadn't told Mr. Bennett about all of this.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. And so I come into Bennett Holdings on Monday morning, and the controller there comes in, and usually when Bennett called somebody to his office over at Circus, they were in trouble for something, and he calls up and he goes, Mr. Bennett wants to see you in his office. And I says, I think I know what this is. And so I go in there and I walk into the office, and Mr. Bennett, he goes, did you have a good weekend? I says, pretty good. And he says, did you have a good time? I said, yes, I did. And about that time, his wife had been, they owned a house in La Jolla, California, and she had been over doing some decorating that weekend. And so she came home with the San Diego newspaper and handed it to Bennett. And of course, Bennett called me. And then when I said, yeah, pretty good, he threw the newspaper out. He says, yeah, it looks like it. And I says, yeah. And he goes, and he asked me a little about the race, and I tell him. And then he says, you and I have been arguing with the bean counters around here about room rates. He says, wouldn't it be interesting to find out what our occupancy was here in the hotel when we raced boats and when we didn't? And I says, yeah. And I know where this is leading, so I'm going and within the company, my relationship with Bennett, I always tried to keep very separate from everything else, having a personal relationship with a great guy versus taking advantage of that in the company, And so I put 3 different accountants to work there, and I told them, I want you guys to work independently, and I want you to look back at all the years we raced boats dating, I think it was 1972 or something. I said, what I want to know is what our occupancy was and what our profitability was as it relates to that, dating back any year we raced boats and when we didn't. And so they all 3 came back, and they were all 3 within like a half a point of another. In other words, it was the years we raced boats as a circus boat of some time. There was an Excalibur offshore boat, and there was a circus offshore boat that we ran for a while. But we looked at all those years, and all different forms of boat racing, and our occupancy was up 8%, which is millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah, right.
And a lot of casinos, and still to this day, people, anytime their drop isn't what they want or their profitability per day isn't what they want, they look at the hotel and say, well, let's just up the room rate. And then all the financials, the bottom line works out. One of the reasons Bennett brought me into the meetings, because I shared the view that if the profitability of the casino isn't where it should be, that's our fault. We're not going to punish the customer for our short-sighted. Maybe we didn't promote as well as we should have. Maybe we weren't promoting in the right venue. Maybe geographically weren't promoting in the proper. Maybe the rugs we got in the hotel are the wrong color. People don't like them. Maybe they don't like the bathtub. You had to look at yourself instead of just doing the mathematical thing, which is just raise the room rate.
Right.
And so he liked it that I would say, let's ask questions about, let's not look at the blame somebody else. Let's blame ourselves first and see if we can fix it. So knowing all of that, Bennett says, let's find out, so I find out, and I bring all 3 of the reports in and I hand them to him, and he looks through them. And he looks back at me and says, I think we got no choice. You're going to have to race boats again. He throws it back at me. And we do. But
how many people in this world go to sleep at night hoping somebody says that to them? You have to go race boats. I'm sorry to tell you.
Have to go race boats, yeah. And, well, I mean, it's a big change again for me to go, okay, I'm supposed to run this hotel that's coming out of the ground right now. And Bennett had put me in charge of a lot of different things in the hotel. And so I was really integrated in, anytime he had tried to put me, I believe, in sort of his place in the company, that he had enough trust. And he was telling me stories all the time, which were learning lessons, all of his stories. And my uncle did the same thing. They tell you stories, and if you're paying attention, you can learn a lot.
Yeah.
If you just think it's an old guy's story,
right,
you don't learn a lot. But if you listen to what he says, there's a lot to be had. And so he was doing a lot of that. And so I was positioned in this company to run it,
So that obviously says a lot about what it takes and what it entails to be a crew. I mean, you're a crew chief on an unlimited boat, right? So he saw you for 3 years. Obviously, what he saw, that just tells you the extent of what it takes to do what you did as a crew chief, that he saw enough like, okay, you're going to now come, like, you've got those skills. I've seen you do it with my race boat. You can do this kind of stuff with my race boat and manage a race team. Now you've got the stuff it takes to run hotels or whatever. So
he was a people guy. And like we ran the same accounting system and the racing team as he did in the hotel, which was at the time it was new because computers were new, just getting going. And so really what we were running is sort of a supersized QuickBooks program where we could compare, what we did on this day last year, compared to this day this year. And you could really monitor all that stuff. And so we ran the same system, and he watched what I would flag and what I would do. And when I went work, there was 3 people that got the daily financials, a closely held secret in the casino world. And regardless of what project I was working on, I was working for Circus and for other Bennett companies all at the same time. There's a daily financial would come out every day, a complete financial, what most people do quarterly or biannually or annually. He did every day. And he used to say, he says, David, it doesn't do any good to steer the bus when you're in the ditch. You got to figure out how to stay out of the ditch.
You got to see the ditch before you get to it, right?
That's right. And so he would, no matter where I was, he would courier that daily report. It was Rick Bannis, who was I think he was the president at the time, if I remember right. And Bennett and myself would get that report. And so I learned that it was my job to look at that report and to ferret out where were the red flags in that. So what Bennett would do is he would go into work at about 9, about 3:30 or so, he would go home. He'd take a nap. He'd wake up, he'd call the hotel to send food over to his house to him and his wife, Samantha. And he'd have dinner, and then he'd look at that report. So along about 10 o'clock, he'd get a call every night and said, hey, what'd you see? And part of that was he wanted somebody to help look at that. And part of that was training, and so I was headed to do all those things. And so then going back to racing, well, that's a total shift into another whole direction. It's a 180-degree turn. But we did it. But that's when we bumped into, we had some problems with the boat that we learned, and had some struggles with that and some of those things. And so he quit again. Yeah.
Well, and going back to like your value with him, you're really valuable. You've proved your muster as a person and an operations guy and all that, but he must have seen really a lot of value in the boat racing thing if he took you out of that to put you back in a boat, because you're risking, there's risk, and he's taking you out of a lot of operations. So that's another, you can really see he really saw the value in the boat racing by that aspect too.
He did. He was a realist. He looked at the boat racing that he'd stopped, but he looked at the bottom line and going, we were promoting in all the right places for the hotel. It was visible. And of course, we spent money on marketing. We bought billboards and did things that helped the sport more, as Budweiser did and Miller had done, and Winston and other people that, did a lot to support boat racing as a whole. But he saw that 8%, a giant number in those guys. And we can't argue with that.
Yeah.
And we looked at it was like a light switch. It was turning it on and off over those years. You could see that the boat racing was really doing a good thing. And Anheuser-Busch, I know from talking to August Busch III and IV, that, they looked at the same things. Yeah, they got a lot of heat for what they did in the sport, but they viewed their boat as, and August III told me this one day. He says, Dave, he says, we built this around the Clydesdales, and that's, kind of our centerpiece. But the reason that we asked the boat to be at such a high level is that right next to the Clydesdales is our Miss Budweiser.
Yeah.
Because that was one of the first things that they had as a motorsport that they got into gear. So, just like if you watched August the 3rd and 4th walk by the Clydesdales truck, you could see they analyzed every buckle and every piece of leather and were the horses being perfectly cared for. And everybody there knew it wasn't like they were asking for something extra. They hired people that would operate at that level of excellence. And that's what they expected. And I'm sure not any different than their brewmasters in different places that they had entrusted the holy grail of their brand into a group of people to make sure that the quality of that beer, or the way the Clydesdales were kept, or the way the Miss Budweiser presented itself, that had to be on a different level. That had to be a level of excellence that it was 10 out of 10, nothing less. So we learned a lot from all of those guys.
Yeah. And you've just done so much. It's crazy. I don't even know where to go next, man. But so back to the Ron Jones and this new boat, kind of your first foray into driving. Like, so how long did it take you to get comfortable to transition, and how hard was that to transition from a crew chief to a driver? I think I read somewhere where something about you were saying that you were taking too much care of the parts. And so
exactly.
I just said the fine line between recklessness and being conservative on that, right? So how did that all go down?
Yeah, and that was part of the learning process when I signed on as a crew chief and did that. And like I say, Chip blew the boat over the first year. We had something that was like 8 to 10 miles an hour faster than most everybody, but and we crash it. Well, we didn't have two of them. We only had 5 months to build that, and we didn't have time to build a spare. So you learn about that, and you learn about those hardships and what it's like to race on a real circuit instead of just picking and choosing. In limited racing, you can pick and choose where you go race. When you're ready at the top level, you go race the boat. But when you're signed on as a professional, you got to be there every week, and sometimes that's, you might have to be on the road for a couple of months. And, how do you do all that? How do you manage all that? How do you manage your energy? How do you manage the team morale when you're working that hard over those periods of time? And so that has value. And so when you're starting to drive that monster and you're taking all the hits that you take, every time you wound it, it's difficult. And we did that with that two-wing boat. We learned, and Budweiser learned the same thing when they tried the same concept. There's so much water, and the water's so rough that having a vent in between it just gave it a place to tear itself apart. And we knew, even at San Diego, when I won at San Diego, it came back and part of the right side of the boat was missing, and we fixed it for Hawaii and ran there, and that was pretty smooth water. But when we went back east again to race, we found out, wow, this water is so rough here and it's tearing the boats apart. And that was part of the demise of that whole thing, that we weren't racing the boat at the level that Circus needed it to. And so we stopped, but part of it was we were just sort of trapped with that particular design. With that kind of water, just wasn't the right boat for it. And so that was hard and expensive, but we learned a lesson. And so, but some of the things we learned in a wind tunnel in 1988, the boats we're racing today basically were designed in 1988 because we asked one question that was different than what everybody else asked. Everybody else asked, when they're going to spend $50,000 to go to the wind tunnel, the owner is spending that much money. Even back then, that'd be 100, 150 today, right? You're spending a lot trying to get some answers to questions. And so then what a smart guy that was around me said, he goes, what you have to do is ask the right question. For a wind tunnel, you have to ask the right question. So what's the question we want to ask? And my reply was, I said, well, it looks like these things, I hadn't even raced a boat at this point in time when we did this in 1988. I hadn't even been to a race course as a crew chief yet. But I said, well, it looks like these things are plenty fast enough. They just crash all the time. How can we make them not crash? And so we asked a lot of questions and made components in the wind tunnel model so we could take the canard off, that everybody had a spar that was up in the front of the boat, which presented a lot of area. So when the boat was pitched up, the drag of that and the center of pressure moved way forward. When it did that, boats would blow over more easily. The cockpit was about 2 foot further forward. And so we made it. That was the original part. So we made a model that we could take parts out of and switch them out to what we thought might be a better idea. And so really the boat we're racing today is that boat. We'd move the cockpit back so that there wasn't so much area forward. We'd taken the spar out and put a little teeny spar in to hold the front of the cockpit and put a full flying canard so it essentially wasn't present. It could match the pitch of the boat, so then it didn't become such a factor as the old one did in the old concept. So we knew what it needed to do then, but then you're still racing boats, and the boats weren't built to do that. At that point in time, boats were built with panels of honeycomb that have 17 thousandths thick skins that hold them together. And so if you move the cockpit back and that spar back, the boat would fall apart. And so we never got to building that boat until about 1995. The people at Budweiser had figured that out. And so they built a boat with that concept. They'd learned some things. Chip was then driving the boat for them. And so he had learned some things that we had talked about. And he relayed them to the Budweiser people, and they took it and ran with it. And they built a boat. That was the good news. The bad news is I think they beat the Sponson off it like 3 or 4 times that year. So, I mean, everything we do that steps outside of the norm, there's going to be it may be a benefit, but there's also a price to pay and a learning curve. Now we know how to put a boat together that way, and they're pretty reliable. But back then we didn't. And so we didn't do anything with that design because A, we didn't have time. B, we're not sure what we'd do. I'm not sure how to put the boat together. So that didn't happen because nobody knew, nobody knew how to do that. We knew it's what we needed to do. We didn't know how to do it.
Yeah.
Budweiser suffered the consequences. And then really it wasn't until I got the Budweiser. Chip was struggling with the controls of it and stuff when he was driving there. And then when I came to drive there, I got lucky and came up with some innovative ways to control that canard so that the driver could control it a little better. And that turned out to work. And that was, every once in a while you got to get lucky. You can be a smart guy all you want and talk to all the smart guys, but every once in a while you got to just get lucky. And that was one of those things.
Yeah, but you learn enough through the years, you narrow down the parameters, right? Like the luck, you got a pretty good chance of getting lucky when you've eliminated a lot of the other stuff that you learned.
You have to learn. And but that's the fun of it too. I think there was talking to one team member about one of the changes that we were making to the decks one time. And I said, I think this is the way we need to go. And this is what we did in the wind tunnel. And here's what the shape needs to be. And he goes, yeah, but the boat's fast right now and it works great right now. And I says, yeah, but if that's true, we'd still be running the Budweiser Griffin. We would have never changed. We have to keep trying to push the limits and do something a little different than what everybody's doing right now to learn enough to be ahead of the pack.
Right.
The development is dangerous and it's expensive, but in the end, it will pay big dividends to the person that figures it out. But again, it points to that needle comes around to people that have ideas and you watch as, people that you've worked with in the past and they're working on other teams and you watch the other team's level of competition go up. And it's because of that tribal knowledge. You've learned things, you've learned what works and doesn't work. And you've been at the forefront of the information of why they work that way. A lot of people do things because it's monkey see, monkey do. Somebody bolts a part on a NASCAR, they bolt on a fence on the back of it to get more down pressure in the car. And then everybody in the pit area does the same thing. And that's work. But the first guy knew why he did it. The rest of them just copied it.
Yeah, right.
And so learning the whys of why you do things is really important. And that points again to people. There's a guy that was a legend in unlimited racing. His name was Glenn Davis. And dating back to when I was like 19 years old, he had asked me to come help him dyno some engines he built a lot of engines for limited boats. And he was considered to be one of the smart guys. And he also worked on the Atlas Unlimited team. And so he was somebody we all looked up to. And I caught him one day where I'd ask him some question. I'd always ask him these difficult questions because he would always have the answer. One day I asked him some question he didn't have the answer to. And I says, his name was Glenn Davis. And I said, Glenn, you don't have the answer for that one, Glenn. And I've given him a bad time about that. And he goes, Dave, he says, you don't have to be the smartest guy in the world, but you need his phone number.
That's a good one.
That turns out to be true. You can't be the smartest guy in everything to all things. But if you have some really good people around you that you can turn around and say, hey, run the numbers on this. I've had a lot of people, like there's a guy by the name of Derek Rogers who was a friend of mine that was knocking on the door the first days it was circus. He says, I know how to build a better inlet for these. And here's what we need. He was the guy that told me, ask the wind tunnel the right question. What question do you want to ask? And help me set that all up. Could have never done it myself. I knew about it because of my model airplane experience. I knew I had a lot of friends at the Edwards Air Force Base, for instance, they were dropping space shuttles off of models and trying to figure out how to fly them down to the floor of Edwards Air Force Base out there. They were at the forefront of all of that. And so I had learned something from them watching lifting body concepts and what shapes. It wasn't just like everybody at hydroplane racing, just like our 2-wing and 3-wing designs we built. We looked at it as how we controlled air down the middle of the boat. It was the work that we did for the space shuttle that really taught me about shapes of the whole body itself. It's not just how much air that boat traps. It's what are the shapes around it that make it more drivable or less drivable. And there's things to be learned about that. We learned that, like that same guy, Glenn Davis, he had a 4-point design boat that he ran as the ELAM, another sponsor that I drove for. And that boat did exactly what it was supposed to. It was very pitch stable, had a lot of great things about it. But when it bounced and got up into the air, I hadn't thought about another law of physics, which is mass tends to go in one direction, right? So when the boat bounced out of the water and was stable, it still had a lot of energy. It had 6,500 pounds going up. And so it kept going up. It didn't blow over like a hydroplane. It just kept going up until it got to be about 50 feet in the air. And anybody that might have looked at that footage, it falls down from 5 stories, breaks the front end of it off, hurts the driver. And that was the day I was there watching that, and I scratched my head and I go, okay, forget about all that stuff that we thought about. We need to, we can't have, if we have something that's truly stable, we can't have it be 50 feet in the air because the driver can't survive coming back down. So now we need to design something like we did in 1988. When it does blow over, it's going to blow over closer to the water. So then the driver has more of a chance to survive. And one thing that like Lucero did is he looked at when we were first designing these cockpits, and Ron Jones was right up front of that. He was a big proponent of that. And of course I followed because I helped him build some of that stuff on different boats that he was working on. And he looked at what the crashes looked like, all the crashes that crashed the boats. He says, you notice one thing? He says, the cockpit's still intact. This frail fiberglass cockpit was still in one place. And there was a reason for that, is that when the boats crashed, it broke off the sponsons, the tails, parts of the boat. It broke that off, but it used up its energy slowing down, tearing parts of it, and the cockpit was still there. And so he said, if we just put the driver in the cockpit, he's probably safer than anything else. If we did that, and that's where the first reinforced cockpits, where we made the cockpit stronger. It was still open, but made it stronger. Ron Jones and Lucero did that. Ron Jones wanted to build a full cockpit. I built some of both, in the early days, because like I got hurt in an accident where it was learning again, where the Pico boat was beating the Budweiser boat. And so Bernie wanted to build a boat that was like the Pico boat. We did that knowing in that winter time of 1996, we knew that design, that older design, worked very well. And we managed it really well, but we knew its Achilles heel because we'd already been in the wind tunnel. We knew what we were looking at, and didn't know at the time that I was going to get lucky and build a foot pedal / canard system control that would work. They were struggling with it. Some really smart guys, hadn't been very successful. But once we got that canard working, we knew what was right. But like the boat that was the older style boat that I was racing when I got hurt in Tri-Cities, it did exactly what we knew it would do. What we didn't know is we'd built a cockpit so we could fit cowlings from boat to boat and whatnot. And we'd built the rear entry of it. And we'd built this really something you could drive a Mack truck over piece. And I thought that, boy, we've kind of overbuilt this, with what we built. I thought we've kind of overshot. This thing weighed like 80 pounds. And it was only like 2 feet long and about 3 feet wide, and kind of scratching your head going, man, I think I overdid that one a little, But I thought about it. And one day when we're finished getting ready to attach all that stuff, and one of the guys who's working there, he says, this is all really strong, but what if somebody runs over the back of us and then we crash the boat, roll the boat over then? How do we protect the driver then? I was the driver. And he goes, yeah, you got it. I says, why don't we put a honeycomb panel? We know honeycomb aluminum has this unique ability over a strong composite work that it's more ductile. It withstands the impact, yet stays in somewhere near its original form. So I said, let's put a bulkhead in the middle of this. So if we get run over, at least it will fold back up against this other stuff and deflect the water away from the driver. And sure enough, had we not put that panel in there, I wouldn't be talking to you. Because when I crashed that boat going backwards and it crushed that back section, that rear panel folded up against the back of where my head was. And the water actually took my helmet off it. The friction of the water spun the helmet off of my head. Ooh. It blew the whole canopy off like you'd thrown a hand grenade inside the thing and closed the door. It just blew it straight off of there, like something like you couldn't even think possible. And we learned about the force there. We went, oh my God, look at how much force is there. We had no idea that much force would be there. And that's where the cockpit of today is born, as we created something that had a much stronger upper section that had when we talked about that, they said, well, how do we want to shape it? And I says, let's make an egg. Egg is the most aerodynamic, strongest. It's nature's perfect form. Let's build an egg. And that's why if you look at the form of what the cockpits were building, that's what we did. And then we built a roll cage that didn't have a door, that has a door in the top, but the roll cage itself wasn't. And people thought that at the time. People said, we can't get to the driver. We don't like that. We want it to hinge in the middle so the safety people, so they can get to the driver. And I told one of the safety guys, I says, okay. I said, what I want you to do though, I said, let's talk about this next week. I said, I want you to go to the local sprint car track and I want you to go tell one of the chassis builders there that you don't like it, that the driver has to crawl in through the side of that sprint car.
Yeah, weld in the door and see what they say.
and see, if they have a hinge on the top that hinge that roll cage, if they think that's a very good idea. Why don't you ask them that question and then we'll talk about it next week. Came back and says, okay, I get it. And that's where they were born today.
Yeah.
But it's been learning.
Yeah. And obviously I didn't realize how much the names, you talk about Lucero and Ron Jones and yourself and probably dozens of guys, but it's really good that they were progressive enough to look at when stuff happened. Like, we're not going to just leave it at that. We're going to keep moving forward.
They invested a lot, both monetarily, physically. They spent a lot of time. We tried a lot of experience to make things better, and we had to learn. And the learning was expensive, but they knew people like Bernie and the Bush family and people like the Atlas people and the Winston people knew it couldn't be a death sport. You couldn't lose that many drivers as they were losing. And that was a deterrent. I wasn't sure I wanted to be involved. One of the guys that Jerry Bangs got killed in Seattle, it was one of my idols growing up, that he was one of the best drivers and in limited racing. But when he got it into Unlimited, he fell out of it. He hooked it and fell out of it in Seattle, and it ran over him and killed him. And he went, wow, that don't look so healthy. Those things, know. Now I don't think I'm older now. Death is much less deterrent as it used to be.
Well,
I use against the younger guys.
And that's something we haven't talked about yet, but it's obviously another thing going on is, you just came out of retirement, 70 years old, the oldest guy ever to drive one of these boats. Oldest guy ever. You've done it. I think you've done it a couple times, right? Retired for a while and come back. So
I keep trying to retire. I'm just not very good at it.
Yeah. So what's this one? What's different about this time, and what brought you back this time?
Well, I was presented an opportunity that Apollo and Mr. Bruce Radford and his family, all the employees there at Apollo were big boat fans from the Tri-Cities area. And it turned out that I had met them in like what I'd call a past life. We were there with the Budweiser team, and I don't remember what it was, but I needed some part built, and so I asked around and got in the phone book this was like, in the late 90s, because I needed to find a sheet metal shop someplace. I could go do the work, but I needed to find a shop someplace that had equipment to build a certain part. And so I looked up and I found Apollo, and I went and Apollo, and it's like 6 blocks away from the pits. I thought, that's where we're going. And I show up there. I meet a guy that used to work with, it was actually Jim Brown Jr., a guy that we started a plumbing business with that I worked at for a long time in Bremerton. And he was there as an estimator. And I went, oh my God, here's that. And he goes, hey, I want you to meet the owner here. He's a big boat fan. And so I go over and I talk to him. And so we meet each other, and I get the part built and go back, and nothing happens for years. But then Apollo people approached Mr. Ratchford and Apollo to help with Tri-Cities, the race, and Seattle race. And they're having meetings. And then I came up somewhere along the line, and that story came up, and they wanted to race a boat. And so there was a couple of options. And so I had helped try to get the Wiggins boat running, help Charlie, as another friend of mine I'd done things with. And I wanted to help him get further along. And so I went down and helped him a little bit. So that became an opportunity to sponsor a boat, and we did. And along that path, Bruce is a guy that worked on the shop floor. He's the guy that's built everything in his whole business. And he knows how difficult that is. And he does a lot of nuclear work. He does a lot of food grade work. All of that is it's not easy. None of that work is easy. And that's something I'd been involved with while in my tenure in the sheet metal industry. So Bruce and I immediately bonded when he'd call me up on the weekend and say, what are you up to? And I'd tell him, and he said, why don't you send some pictures? I sent him some pictures. And, so he was interested in all of that. And we developed a friendship over that last summer. And so then when things progressed, some other opportunities for him came up. He decided what he wanted to do. But one of his first calls, he called me up and he says, I need to know one thing. He says, I'm thinking about doing a couple of things, buying there's like 3 different boats that he could buy. He said, I'm thinking about doing this, but I need to know if you'll help me with this. It's a basic question. Didn't know who was going to drive the boat, didn't know what boat it was or anything else. But I had this because I'd got to know him, much like I talk about Bernie and Mr. Bennett, people that I've grown to know. He was another one of those type of guys. He's a brilliant, he knows operational. He's a brilliant working guy. He can build anything there. At the same time, he has a great business has a great business mind and a great financial mind. That's how he's gotten as successful as he is. And it's been fun to work with him. And so when he asked me that question, the answer had to be yes, And so I told him that. I says, hey, Bruce, whatever you decide to do, don't care what it is, I'm here for you 1,000%, whatever you need. So go make the best decision. You think that whatever you want to do, I'll help you in any way I can. But in the end, it's whatever you decide to do, I'm going to support. So here I am again.
In that conversation, did anywhere in the back of your mind, were you thinking driving again, or is it something you never gave up? Like you always, okay, I'm going to drive again someday.
Well, I'd driven, recently, in the last 4 or 5 years, I helped another friend of mine that another whole story of, guys I'd race flat bottoms with, and Kelly Stockland decided that he wanted to race a boat. And so, I spent some time helping them get up to a competitive level. And so, I spent some time doing that. And so when we decided to do this, it was like, okay, well, I can be here as a driver. I think I can do something good for the sport. I think that by virtue of mine being around and working on things physically in the shop helps bring that unit together. And I think and I'm not taking credit for that. I got some really, really great people that could have taken this situation and made it not a good thing, but people that chose to have positive attitudes and take on these challenges that we're taking on with running 2 boats and all the equipment changes that have to be there, because we have to make, there was engines and gearbox combination and engine mounts and all that stuff that was in the Wiggins boat, which is totally different from what was in what the 91 boat has. So we had to make a decision what to do. And so you can have stuff that's separate, but we thought the better choice long-term was to make all the equipment duplicitous. So that
Sure.
we can interchange stuff. So, but that's a challenge. Now you got to put your coveralls on and go to work. Anything's possible. You just have to make it happen. And so we did. And right now we're painting an Apollo boat, but I didn't see what was really going to happen. I just knew that I really liked Bruce as a person and his family as a person. And I'd spent some time in their shop when we had to fix a boat in between Tri-Cities and Seattle with the people that worked there, that when the request was made, that was something that I wanted to do. So here we are. We're doing it.
Now being involved in that project very early on, and obviously you're from a consulting role, and then you get your hands dirty. Do you think driving the boat kind of completes the whole circle? Like now you get to see a 360 picture of this whole thing. Do you think that helps?
I think it does. It definitely does for me. Like Mike Hansen's another principal that's there. Mike was also a driver. And so he knows what things feel like. He knows how they work. He's been doing it for a long time. And I think that helps me. I can do things, another guy's working on our team now that worked on the Stockland team. He says, Dave, you can get out of the boat every time and have 5 things to change to make it better, And I said, that's probably true.
Yeah.
You feel a lot of things and you can process stuff really quickly that normally would take a much longer time. You can get right to the heart of the issue. And that's something I kind of bring to it because I've got so much experience in all the different design things and propeller design and skid fin design and rudder design and all that stuff. I was mentored by a lot of really great people and I'm still holding that. And part of my process here is to pay that forward, into other people. I've tried to do that over the last 10 years or so is when there's an opportunity to try to pay that forward. Try to move the what I call tribal knowledge, try to push that back into the sport. Some things that were a secret 10 years ago, we're trying to make known to people so that the next new generation can grow in this great sport and still be entertaining people years from now, decades from now.
That's commendable. I want to ask you about that, but I want to ask you one more question about the driving So do you think the fact that obviously I'm going to call it data collection that you do as a driver, right? You said you get out of the boat, right? As a crew, you go into crew chief mode while you're driving, right?
Yeah.
So obviously that's an appeal to you, but is that what keeps you coming back, or do you just really love driving?
I think I like all of that.
Yeah.
I think I like all of that. There's and as you alluded to in the past, I was going, I don't want to tear this thing up. And so I'd make decisions to not tear the boat up. And they don't always work. Even though you may be saying that, you're still beating things to death, running them through the water that you are, or running into people, or blowing the thing over, all the things that you do that are not good. But you learn through them. And one thing that, I had to there was a certain point in time where I had to just shift gears and go, and really during the Budweiser days more than anything, and actually part of the Leland area, like I say, Dave will crash test anything for you. Anything that's got a chance of failing, give it to Dave. And if he can't break it, it'll work.
Yeah.
He's the test dummy. If he'll be the guy that shows you that it will fail or not. He'll find a way to make it fail.
Yeah.
Like just put pressure on it,
But with your technical knowledge, obviously, the places where, okay, I can hang it out here because if I do hurt it, it happened. But if I hang it out here, then I'm being stupid because the boat's, it's in a compromised position, or, it's whatever, loss of oil pressure, whatever, it's in a compromised position and you're not going to make that decision. But it always fascinates me with drivers, especially like with you, where, you don't own any of this stuff. And the whole owner driver thing, because the owner wants the best result, but the perfect scenario is bring it back in one piece. But there's obviously that fine line, right? I mean, you're not going to win in most cases unless you're kind of hanging it out there, right? You're on that edge of really breaking stuff.
Yeah, you have to make, I think it's really 2 different decisions. One is I need to have a place, and there needs to be a place where you go, I'm going to go out and race this thing as hard as I possibly can. And if it comes back in a bag of parts or doesn't come back at all, that's okay, because I need to give 10 tenths, and in the water that we're racing in, it's rough enough and nasty enough. And the boats are big and they're heavy and they're beating themselves to death. You're seeing, like, I remember looking at some data that were from Seattle running in really rough water. We're getting 25 to 50 G spikes naturally they're not sustained hits, but you're taking these big hits. I told somebody one time, I said, probably one of the reasons I've done well, where a big guy usually doesn't do very well. Big guys are, as opposed to a guy that's 5'6", he's the eye hand stuff for a guy like that is usually better. But luckily my dad was a Golden Glove boxer, so my eye to hand was really good. And that helped me. And then a lot like, you can put a linebacker in a football game that's really fast. And he can get a hold of that running back that runs through a hole someplace, but he gets hit every time that really fast linebacker that weighs 180 to 200 pounds and takes on that 260-pound running back, and he takes a hit every time. Well, through the game, he's really something. That lightweight linebacker is really something at the first quarter of the game, because he's getting to that running back and he's stopping those long runs. He's doing all the things, but that 260-pound running back wears him down. By the time he gets to the fourth quarter, he's all out of hits. He can't stop him anymore, and he's too hurt. He's trying, he's got the heart, but he just doesn't have the physics to do it. And that's one thing I thought that I brought to it, was I can take the hits. Even though I'm bigger, I can take the hits over time. And a lot of time that's the difference, is just persevering what the boats will do to you. So I try to separate that. Okay, I'm going to go out and beat this thing to death, and it's fine to try to win this race. No matter what it gets into, I'm going to throw it into there and put it in an all or nothing win situation. But there are times when you have to play the odds. And I can give you an example. Like, I'm driving the Pico boat. Chip Hanover's driving the Budweiser boat. Mark Tate is driving the Smokin' Joe's. And I draw heat where I draw Hanover. And we're at Detroit, and we're at the Gold Cup. And I run just outside of him. I think we had to run 4 laps that day. And so I run right alongside of him for about 3 laps, and I let him go the 4th lap. Well, then the owner of Pico, Larry Wisney, comes up to me and says, "Man, it looks like they let him go that last lap." And I says, "Yeah, I did." And he goes, "Well, why would you do that?" And I says, "Larry, this is a long race. It's over 4 days, from qualifying to the final heat. Managing the equipment to make sure you got something left at the end of that's really important, And so sometimes you give a little to get a little." And I could tell he kind of looks at me and goes, "I don't know about this driver guy. Maybe he's not as intense as I need to be." Well, 15 minutes later, Hanover's on the inside, Tate's on the outside. They make the start. They go to the first turn at Detroit there. And I don't know whether Chip went out or whether the Smokin' Joe's came in a little and pinched a little. But anyway, they both got together. Hanover ends up upside down and backwards, knocks the canopy off the boat. He's out of the race. He's in the hospital. And about 10 minutes later, Larry Wisney comes back into the boat and he goes, "I see what you mean." So there's those decisions where you tactically make decisions to give, to get the equipment to the end of the day. Then you throw at it what you need to, and at the same time, there's next week. So do you put the boat in a bad position? That throttle works both ways, where if you haven't made the right start, or somebody maybe somebody didn't make a good start either. They're out in front of you. Like I know that I've seen that happen in the past, where somebody jumps the gun by 3 or 4 boat lengths and they get up into the first turn, and you're trying to win the race. But if you put the boat into position that when the other guy's spray gets there and you're 3 or 4 boat lengths back, you can't see where you're going. You end up upside down and backwards and maybe run over, and you're thinking, were all the right decisions made there? Even though maybe you made a good start, somebody else didn't by jumping the gun, there was still a reaction that you could make that got the boat to the next race without it being in 2 pieces. Mm-hmm. And you have to make those decisions on the fly But I've been like I said, I've been called Darth Vader. A lot of people liken me to Dale Earnhardt Sr., and they're probably right. I was, they said, "Well, you didn't have to do that. That was just mean." And I said, "Yeah, I guess it was." I said, John Love once told me one time when we're talking about that and not doing things that are nice. And he says, "Dave," he says, "the nice lanes are lanes 3 through 6. The race lanes are 1 through 3. He awesome. Says, "This ain't no popularity contest." And I says, "Yeah." So just block that out.
And so going back to your analogy about taking the hits, right? I mean, again, doing this as long as you have, and you've won 67 times, I think, which is the record for the most ever. So I can't even imagine. I don't think I saw a number. Can't imagine how many losses were involved in that, right? But you've taken, 7 years. It's just amazing. At 70, you're still wrestling one of these beasts around. But with a history that long, you've had to have done it right. If the picture is so if you've had those days where they're calling you Darth Vader or whatever, the fact is that your longevity has proved that you've consistently done it right. That record doesn't lie. You don't luck into that,
Yeah. And I think that's something like here's a story. I got to know Dale Earnhardt Sr. through T. Wayne of Winston. And I went down to Daytona to watch the race, and he had introduced me to Dale Sr. We'd talked and got to know one another. And so I go to Madison, and we won a lot of races with Budweiser. And so for one of the first times I heard somebody boo after I'd won the race, and I thought, well, that's a different thing. And, you don't like to hear that. And somebody had done a poll at that race site, and they said 51% of the people want you to win, 49% of the people want you to lose. What do you have to say about so many people wanting you to lose? And I says, well, first of all, I just care that 100% of them cared enough to even vote.
Yeah. There you go.
That's important. But then I got this boo, and so I called Dale Sr. and I says, hey, what'd you do? What do you think about? I got a couple of boos here. What'd you do? Because he'd been booed a bunch,
Oh yeah.
And I says, what do you think about that? And he goes, oh hell. He says, if they ain't booed you, you ain't done nothing yet. I says, oh okay. I'll quit worrying about that.
Yeah. Fantastic.
He's a great guy.
So you mentioned about Dale Jr. So how did that connect? Is that how you made the connection with Dale Jr.?
Yeah, and I haven't talked to him much for a lot of years, but there was a point in time. It was the end of a Budweiser convention in my first year racing for Budweiser, and I'm just trying to stay out of trouble. You go to the national convention and you have to attend bar at a number of places, and you have to go to a number of meetings, the things that they want you to do. And that was all good. There's nothing wrong with that. And that was fun. But at the same time, I'm trying to stay out of trouble. I don't want to say the wrong thing to the wrong person or do the wrong thing or disrespect somebody I'm supposed to respect. I don't know. There's all kinds of landmines around those sort of public appearances. And so I'm very carefully made it all through this. I've made it to the last hour of what the convention, and I can go back to the hotel and leave. About that time, the marketing manager for the Budweiser brand came to me, along with the vice president of sports marketing, came to me and says, Dave, could we talk to you for a minute?
Uh-oh.
And I said, yeah. And so I go, sure, what can I do? Oh, we got a room over here. Can we go over and talk in there? And I went, oh, this isn't getting any better. That there's going to be, what did I do? I'm thinking as I'm walking to this room. And they bring me in. They says, Dave, he says, we're really happy that you've taken our Budweiser program and made it a winner again. I want you to know how much we appreciate that. And, but you're also our vice president of Hydroplanes Incorporated. You're the running that operation as a team manager as well. And so for that reason, we want to ask you some of your advice. He says, we really want our NASCAR team to be successful. And we've tried, we've went to Hendrick Motorsports, which were running on top. Jeff Gordon was running right there at the lead all the time. And so a Hendrick Motorsport car was a great car. And so we went to them. We've tried a couple of different drivers. We've even repainted Jeff Gordon's car. They didn't wrap them back then. They painted them. So they took the car and stripped it and painted it, to the Budweiser car. We've taken the engines. We've rebuilt the engine that won the week before and put it in the car so that if it was a magical engine or something that, that they've done everything for us. But
wearing the same underwear.
Yeah, it was still not successful. What do you think we ought to do? I mean, much the same thing happened with the Budweiser boat team. I sat back and I said, it's because it's about people. I said, you're talking about the car and the engine, and the organization is part of the people, but it's the people. I said, I think what you need to do is you need to find a driver that's got a lot of experience around him. Maybe a driver that's raced the Busch. It was the Busch Series was the next series down from NASCAR at the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I said, you need to find somebody there that's got a group of people around them. And which was my safe answer to not really talking about anyone in particular. And they go, well, okay, who do you think, you know, all that stuff, you know, who do you think we ought to look at? And I says, well, I said, I've known Dale Earnhardt, I've got to know Dale Earnhardt Sr., and which brought me to, he described to me what the origins of DEI was, is he wanted to take people that were in the Childress organization. And back then, the guys that built the cars and built the engines were much like hydroplane racers, the same 5 to 10 guys built the cars, got in the truck, drove them to the track, unloaded them, raced them, put tires on them, and rinse and repeat. You know, they were all the same guys, but they're doing it 30 races a year, right? So Superman can't do that and have some sort of life, you know, every week racing 30 weekends. I don't even know how many they race now, but it was something like 30 some races a year. Superman can't do that. They had to figure out, Childress had to figure out, how do I change these guys out? Meanwhile, like Dale said at the time, he says, hell, he said, I make $40 million on T-shirts, you know, and I always wanted to have a really cool shop. So what we did is, you know, and then some of the kids want to race. So we're, you know, I don't want to just I could go buy them cars, but that won't do them any good. I got to make them work with the people to make the cars run, so they learn about the cars, which I thought was brilliant. And so I started paying attention to what Dale Jr. was doing. I think Gary was racing, and I forget which kids that were part of his organization were racing under the early days of DEI. But really what they were is guys that had won a couple of points championships and Winston Cups were taken out of the lineup from Childress and then put over in the DEI world. And so that's why I told him, I says, I know a place where guys got a pretty good name and they've got all kinds of championship people that are working with them, and some of the people that have worked with them since they started, you know, and told them a little story about, you know, the beginnings of DEI. And they go, well, okay, thanks. We appreciate that. So I get on the airplane, I go home. About 3 or 4 days later, I get a call from August Bush III, not the fourth, the marketing manager, anybody. I get a call from wow. August Bush III in the office in Tukwila in Seattle, Washington. I get we're the same place we're at now. I said, he called up. He said, I just wanted to let you know we hired your guy. Crap, how did this get to be my guy? You know, and I sure hope this works. Yeah. And it turned out it was a success story, and he's been the most popular guy and raced a lot of great races and done a good job and not pissing everybody off while I was doing it. You know, that's commendable all in of itself.
Awesome. That's awesome. So
I'll never forget that. How did he get to be my guy?
Yeah.
You know?
Did he ever acknowledge it or thank you? Or
I met him at some conventions and I've talked to him, but I didn't even know if he knew.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't.
Well, man. So you're both retired at the Hall of Fame. You got to tell them. There's got to be a time when you're having beer over that weekend. You got to tell them.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That'd be fun.
So back to your thing about the tribal knowledge. You know, obviously, I mean I think that's probably a huge. Just I didn't know much about you until we started talking, but I mean, obviously, a big part of your success is years and years and years of picking up knowledge, surrounded by the right guys. And you're still obviously a guy that just still learns today. So how is that getting passed along? Is Unlimited to the new guys? How are we seeing that tribal knowledge get passed along? Is Unlimited? Are they doing anything to bring in young guys? You see an interest from young guys in the crews? And
yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that we talked about when we were talking about we needed to add some people to turn this Apollo boat around. You know, I could go in and put in the hours, and I did to fabricate motor mounts and equipment and stuff like that. I'm good at that, you know. And so when we're making a decision as to how far do we go, should we run a year kind of like it was and just take what we can get and then spend the next winter when we have some time to change everything over. And my approach was, you know, it's our job to put the thing up front, and it's our job to put the organization up front. So if I have to work 20-hour days to make that happen, well, so be it. I said, I always joke about that. When somebody comes up with a new project, I go, well, there's always a graveyard shift. If it's something that needs fabricated, it'll just be here in the morning when you get here.
Yeah. And so you make that commitment to do it. And so we had to add on a few people to make that all happen. And we could go to some of the people we had doing it for years. But then when the 40 team decided to not run this year, well, that opened it up to somebody that I started training in 2014. There's a guy by the name of Taylor Evans. And he, I started him off. He was mowing lawns out in the Sammamish Plateau in Washington State for a parks department, but he was a pretty good mechanic kid. His dad was a mechanic guy that had done a lot of things in the restaurant business. And so he'd done a wide array of things. So he's pretty handy with tools. And they'd been suggested as somebody to help. And so I started working with him. And I think it was like 2014. And then a couple of those programs happened. And he was working with the Stocklands on their 440 boat for a couple of years. And so then when they decided to buy the big boat or the 40 boat from O'Farrell, I came there and helped push that along. And at the same time, Taylor was soaking everything in. And he was a crew chief there. And so he had learned a lot of things. And just the other day, he came over to help us on the Apollo boat because they shut down. And I was watching him work and do things. And, there was a sort of a fatherly thing where you go, wow, look at where this guy with a little incentive and tried to teach him everything you could. And you watch him, really get their own stride. And there's a lot of satisfaction there to pass that along. And Mike Hansen had said, when we're talking about, I could call this guy and that guy that's, another one of us old guys. And like Mike made the joke, he goes, crap, he said, I'm 64 and I'm the youngest guy here, Yeah. And that tells you that we needed to get new people. So Taylor is a 30-something and he's really grown along. And so we're looking at those people to pass that along when you get that opportunity. And that's one of those stories where we'd taken someone in that had some interest. It has to be that first. There has to be an interest and a passion of some sort to do this at all. And he did that, and he's turned into a great person all around.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. I think, we all the old guys today, right? We all complain about young guys don't want to work and blah, blah, blah. But I think part of that is we're all young, right? It's hard to have that attention span when you're young and you got 100 other things and time goes, really slow when you're young. But I think it's a responsibility. I think if we take have a little more grace with those guys, and when you see something in them and give them the benefit of the doubt, I think there's a lot of talent to be had. And so I think it's nice seeing you do your part in that. And I think more old guys need to kind of think about that a little bit. We're so quick to, oh, it's a generation. He doesn't want to work. Well, they think differently.
He doesn't know anything. Yeah. He's got a different idea how to do something. But just like raising kids, you got to find where there's a passion or an interest, and sooner or later you'll find a little spark. And if you're patient enough and fan that amber enough, pretty soon it turns into a flame. And the next thing you know, it's a blazing fire.
Yeah.
Doing the same thing with people.
Yeah. So that's awesome. So speaking of, we're on the subject of young guys. So what was it like? Because I'm sure that you and Mark Tate probably had some, I don't know, I'm going to pull this out of my tail. So hopefully you've had probably some good battles through the years, and he was probably a friendly competitor of yours. So now you're racing against his son. Like how did that feel?
It was all good. In fact, I told when I was working with the Stockland team, I called Andrew and says, hey, he was taking a year off, that he was in between boats, so to speak. And so I called him and said, hey, if I can get this boat running fast, would you be interested in driving? And he goes, yeah. He said, I'd like to work with you, And I said, that'd be great. I said, let's see if we can make this thing work, And I wanted him. He had a good start with the Jones thing, and Jeff Campbell had run a good program there, and they were competitive, and he'd done a good job there. And I wanted him to have a good opportunity, and just want to throw him into something that isn't right, and they run into problems, and it's trouble, and so I was looking to deliver something to him that he could race. And
for a number of reasons that didn't work out. And, but here we are, we circled around and now we're teammates, So, and I knew his mom when she was racing limited boats and his dad when they were racing limited boats. So, it's a lot like family. You've known them for decades, not just, a few years. You've known them for a long, long time. Yeah. And it
has to be a little weird when you know a kid running around in diapers or whatever, and next thing you know, like he's your competitor, you're going wheel to wheel with the guy.
Yeah. Well, we're competitors, but at the same time we're teammates.
Yeah.
And so we'll try to do a little better job than the guys over at Strong did, where they ran over each other there in Tri-Cities and put one of them out of the points race. We'll try to not do that, but still race hard and put on a great show for the fans.
Yeah.
And he's a great competitor. So happy to have him as part of this organization.
Yeah, I had him on the show maybe a year or so ago. Yeah, just a good dude. Like I really enjoyed. In fact, I saw him in San Diego. I actually talked to him in San Diego for a while. So yeah, good dude.
Yeah, he's a great. I think he's one of those good ones that could do anything in this.
Yeah. Hey, so I got to ask you, good to go back, but I mean, so at some point, the Budweiser, the Miss Budweiser, Bernie Little, they make a call. Like, did you see that coming? And I don't really know the history when you first started there, how successful they were at the time, but that has to be. You've talked a little bit about the level of excellence with it, but maybe talk a little bit about more about that whole experience.
Well, the Budweiser team, Bernie had done a great job over the years of looking for talent. As teams change or lose sponsorship, Bernie wouldn't go pirate a team, but he would look for somebody that was a rising star or rising talent in any one position, working on race boats. And when something would change with other teams, then he'd take that opportunity. Much like we have the opportunity with the Stocklands not racing this year to pull Taylor. Now he may go back there, because that's an opportunity for him too. And I've known Kelly for 40 years. We've helped each other race all kinds of things. And so, if Taylor decided to go back next year or later this year to help them, I have no heartburn with that, but it's fun to have the opportunity to get those people. And Budweiser had a lot of those. And Bernie had taken people in over the years, and that's how we ended up with such a high level. I learned something about Mike Hansen the other day. I was watching Mike Hansen work on some boat parts that he was building for the 91 boat. And I watched it, how really great job he was doing. Well, most of the people I knew in boat racing that were the very best were people that had all spent some tenure at Ron Jones Marine. At some point, somebody had spent time building things there, and the level of excellence there. I can give you an example. Like I built some piece of hardware for some steering for Ron Jones, and I was down helping him do some things there, and I built some hardware and I sanded it up a little bit, and it looked pretty good, but it was going to be buried down in the bottom underneath the sponson someplace in a limited boat, and it looked pretty good, but it wasn't perfect. And Ron Jones came by and he says, what do you think? Could we fix that part up down there a little bit, make it look a little nicer? And I go, well, sure, but geez, nobody will ever see it. It's under this sponson, and he goes, yeah, Dave, but if they crash the boat and somebody sees that, we built it. And so you went, you're right. So you go through, and so you had this level that everything you put in there has to be perfect. And so he taught that. And so I'm watching Mike build some parts for this canard that he's building. And he's doing this just fantastic job. And I didn't know, I'd raced against Mike and with Mike for years, but I didn't really know where his origins were, And so I told him one day, this was just a couple of weeks ago, I said, Mike, I want you to know the work you're doing on that's really, really good work. I said, I haven't seen anything like that except for the people that had worked at Ron Jones Marine. And he goes, well, he says, when I was getting out of high school, I went to work at Batesville Occasional. Then after I got done with that, I drove down to Ron Jones Marine. I helped build the Griffin boat. And I went, oh, well, now it all comes together. Now I know where this excellence came from and where that was taught, and we were lucky enough to be taught by the same people. And it's special to see that sort of workmanship. And and again, Ron Jones, senior and junior, they had this tribal knowledge and they passed it on. And now we're trying to do the same things, that everything we do has that level of excellence. Now, that said, in a firefight, all that's off. We're going to put the boat back together and we're going to get it to the next race. And we've done that too. We're going to put whole sponsons on the boat in 3 days. We went and won Seattle. That's what we did with Leland. There's a story of a couple of times that's happened. And that's where the team building and people that are around us today, they live through, like, for instance, Chip crashes the boat. In 1989, we're leading the points lead by a bunch. Chip crashes the boat. We get the old boat out and we put new, more powerful engines in it and better propellers on it. But mostly it's the same old hardware. We go to Tri-Cities. He makes the first run. He goes out, tears the rudder off of it. It's too fast for the rudder. It broke the equipment. So we spend the next 2 days. I fly back to Seattle. I make parts. I fly back out. We put it all together and we do it. It's like we're thinking, no way this will break. He goes out, makes another half a lap, just about crashes the boat, tears the rudder off it again. So we've crashed the boat a couple of weeks before. We come here, we've just about crashed the boat the first time we run it. We just about crashed it the second time we run it. We scratching our head going, wow, we thought we were something there for a while, but boy, we got things to learn. And so we go back and we build this bridge inside of this boat so that this rudder doesn't fall off again, because obviously we're pushing this old boat a little too hard. And we go out. I'm working on propellers and other things. I can't even go down to the racetrack at Seattle there. And so I tell Danny Walters, who was kind of like first Indian there at the time, I said, Danny, just run the boat. I got to go get this propeller done and I got to go do some other things. And so just run the boat today and just see what it does. And we'll go from there. He calls me in about a couple hours later and says, well, the rudder didn't fall off, but we broke the input shaft of the motor and blew up the motor, and I'm going, oh, crap. And so I finally get things together. Everybody's kind of in a tough place. And it's the last day of qualifying. And we go out and I says, well, Budweiser was running like 155. Fastest lap we could run was 145. But I tell Chip and I says, here's the thing. It's going to be rough here. Budweiser's really fast. And they should be able to beat us, but we're going to, I said, I know it's going to beat you up, but I said, we're going to go run this thing. We're going to throw this thing at the race course. Cause back then you had a lot of run time, especially late in the day on, I forget what day it was. They had days split up back then, but it was the last, 2 or 3 hours of qualifying. And I said, we're just going to throw this thing at the race course and we're going to run it as hard as we can in the roughest water we can find, because all the boats are moving in and out of the log boom and it's making big swells. It's a really difficult time where nobody ever qualifies in that time and nobody goes fast. But I said, we're just going to go out and crush waves. We're going to go run this thing as hard as we can for the next couple of hours. And that's our boat. Win or drive. If we can run 145 mile an hour laps here in the ocean, we beat Budweiser. And they go, okay, everybody buys in. We got there, we're throwing the thing at the race course and we're running it around and around and around. And everybody's sort of laughing at us because of what we're doing, and sometimes it wouldn't make sense. But we draw Budweiser for the first heat. Chip starts on the outside and runs around him, running 145 mile an hour lap. And we go, we're in this thing, and we end up winning that race. But it's those type of times that build teams where, and in motorsport, in sport in general, where whether you're a driver or a crew chief or a crew member, you're doing something special that somebody don't think is possible, where the rest of the people and even the fans don't even think that's even possible. But when you pull it off, that's the magic sauce that makes motorsport what it is. It makes sport what it is. We're looking for that special performance like Joe Montana, going down to the goal line in the last few seconds of the game and winning a game, or like Russell Wilson did for Seattle, where it seemed like he just had this bag of magic that he pulled out in the last quarter of each game. That we watch these special performances. Boat racing and powerboat racing isn't any different. We look for those special performances, and that was one of them. And we did the same thing with like Fred's boat. We had Fred's boat. Fred had never won a race in 1994. We had left the circus program, and most of the people that had worked on that, we went over to help Fred, and we'd got the boat running. It had some problems the first part of the season. Their steering wasn't able, again, we're running it harder than what the equipment can run. And so we're constantly fixing and updating as we get through this year to to make things better and raceable. We go over to Tri-Cities and we beat the sponson up. We're running fast. We're running right alongside of Budweiser, but the sponson folds up and breaks the sponson on the boat. So what do? A lot of teams, well, we're done. We'll work on it. Maybe we'll work on it, go to San Diego, or work on it in the winter. Where like Dan Walters and myself and Fred Leland, we go, nope, we're not going to accept that. We load up everything that's on Friday. We load up everything, send it to Seattle. We build a whole sponson and put the boat back together, and we end up winning the race there in Seattle for Fred, who had never won anything. And it's those type of special things again that you just, Danny and I, we showed up Thursday morning for qualifying. We'd run the truck down to the racetrack, and we're sleeping on the trailer waiting for the crane to get there, and put the boat in the water and end up winning the race. Well, again, it's that kind of heart. And, a lot like Dale Earnhardt, like I was behind his pit one day. That day he blew over the car at the back straight of Daytona. Mm-hmm. I was down there in the pit, and Dale crashes the car, and everybody watches the monitor to see, okay, Dale's okay. He walked in, he got in the ambulance. Okay. And so you're kind of wrapping up air hoses and getting ready to go home. About that time, Dale Earnhardt comes screeching into the pits. He doesn't have his helmet on, doesn't have his gloves on, don't have no belts on. He's just sitting there, and he looks at it and he goes, I need 4 tires. And he didn't win that race, but the heart involved of not giving up was that, special ingredient that made him what he was.
Yeah. And that's the stuff like you talk about that week or so, when you just kept building that boat for Chip, and that all builds teamwork, builds grit, and the world sees the wins, right? But for every win, like I said before, like I can't imagine the number of losses. So with all your successes, like what's the one loss? What's that one loss that really sticks with you, that really hurt the most?
Well, not making the circus team the second time around, not making that work, that was hard. We didn't know at the time. Mm-hmm. We thought we were onto something, and it just didn't pan out. And that was hard to not, to had to stop that whole operation and go on to something else.
What did you learn from that? And how did that change your approach going forward?
Well, I had to be more cautious about some of the people that we're involved with, and I'm not talking about circus, just some of the other people that that maybe had been a bit disingenuous about some truths, and so you're more careful about how you set these organizations up, and that's to protect all the people, not just what I did or didn't do. It was you have people that in organizations like that one where you call up people that maybe have another great job someplace, and you call up and say, hey, we think we're going to, I got Circus as a sponsor again, and we're going to run this boat, and look what we did, and look what we can do. And so, 4 or 5 people end their normal life and sign on to the racing life. And that's okay when it runs to what it's supposed to be and what you represent it. But when you tell someone that they changed their life to do a project like that, and then it fails, you go, man, you feel bad about that sort of loss, because it's not just me or a boat owner. It's, the whole team loses. They've interrupted their life to do something. They put an awful lot of work into it. And if something goes wrong that maybe I didn't do the due diligence to know, people's financial position and stuff like that, you go, I'm not going to do that again.
Gotcha. And that's, you've preached to this whole discussion about the importance of people, and there's a perfect example when you don't have the people, right?
Yeah. And that's what, like Bruce, one of the things he wanted to put on the boat last year was building great people who build great things. He understands how difficult it is in any one endeavor to find people in these specialty areas. Hydroplane racing is one of them. Food grade sheet metal work, very difficult. I shopped around some things for a friend of mine to do what we had done in the past, and literally could not find a shop that could do the work that was necessary. I ended up having to do it myself because I just couldn't find anybody that could do the job at the time.
So And obviously, and I haven't really spouted off all the stats, but when you look at Dave's stats, it's unbelievable. The career wins, the Gold Cup wins. You had I think about a 7 or 8 season run with Budweiser where you guys were just virtually unbeatable. But that being said, right, going into the Hall of Fame, what's a story you want people to remember that has nothing to do with your stat sheet?
I think somebody talked about that some time ago. I think the thing that I wanted to be thought of was I wasn't trying to be the most popular driver. I wasn't trying to do that. I wasn't trying to be technically the best. But what I wanted people to know is if they're going to race against me, they're going to race the hardest guy they ever raced. Is that they're going to go up against somebody that is going to race right to the end, or die trying. And I think that's what's important to me, to be remembered in that way, that, that they never raced anybody that raced any harder or completely. There's one thing, a guy that says, oh, I gave it on my best shot, but, they didn't get the boat done, or we didn't have this a piece of equipment, and there's some disclaimer. But I push those aside. There's, and I said, one of the things that I saw in Dale Earnhardt was that determination that no matter what, you're going to have to race him till they need to stop. And then he'd put down the sword. But until then, he was going to race you as hard as you possibly could ever think that somebody would race you. And he'd poke you, jab you, he'd do anything to you. And I'm kind of that way, that they may not like what you do, but you're doing what's everything possible within the rules. And, that may not be that nice. Yeah. It's just how it is.
And I think other drivers, when they learn that, that has to get in their head a little bit, knowing like I make a mistake or he's up my ass this whole time. Like I'm not going to be able to flinch. Right.
Yeah. Well, it's going to go the distance. That's what I said. I said, it's going to go the distance. It may not win, but it's going to go the distance. And there's another mentor of mine, the guy that designed and built the flat bottoms. Actually, he's a brilliant guy, a genius that was part of the Jones brothers who built Delta Marine here in Seattle. He built some of the largest super yachts and fiberglass in the world now these days. But they started out building fishing boats. And then Steve Jones started building ski boats. And then that turned into flat bottom boats. But he was a brilliant guy that taught me all kinds of things. But one day I'm racing at a divisional race in a flat bottom boat. And I was racing against this other guy, and I'm racing as hard as I can. I just about crashed 3 or 4 times. I end up winning the heat of racing, and come back in sort of breathing hard going, wow, that was, man, that guy's pretty fast, And Steve walks up and he said, would you race a race just like I asked you to once? I'm going to show you a different way you could win this race. Would you do that for me? I said, sure, Steve, what would you like me to do? He said, what I want you to do is I want you to make a start on the outside, give him the inside, get on the outside of that guy and make a good start, pull alongside of him, but do not pass him. He said, you're going to find out you're going to win this race in the easiest way possible. So I pull alongside the guy and I run for a couple of laps, and I'm running pretty hard, but I'm not crashing the boat, right? And pretty soon, about the 3rd lap, and it's a 3-lap race, about 2.5 laps, all of a sudden he just goes away. He makes a mistake and goes away. I win the race and I come back and Steve walks up and he goes, wasn't that a lot easier? And so, you learn, you go, okay, I'm going to race them as hard as I can, but I'm also going to take advantage of letting them make mistakes, put them in a position to make a mistake. Instead of trying to overdrive the boat, you put it in a winning position and then see if the other guy can go the distance. And he might. But he had to run as hard as he could the whole time. And if he executes that, that's a good boat race. But, you weren't doing anything to end it. You weren't pinching them off or running into them or anything else. All you did was just get alongside and see if their talent could run the full span of the race and match yours.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But the key was not making your own mistakes.
Right. That's awesome.
And make the other guy make the mistakes. And you're not always going to win that way, but you're going to win a pretty high percentage. Because most of the guys will, they'll get to the last lap or half a lap and they'll push too hard and make a mistake and then there'll be the separation. That'll be the difference.
Mm-hmm.
And something that had it played out the other way may not have happened, or you would have crashed the boat, So just, like I say, you learn from people like that. He was a great boat racer and great mentor. Taught me a lot of the shape things that we're doing today.
And I'm glad you brought up the flat bottom thing. I forgot about that. And being a California guy, right? I mean, I was just at a circle race in Parker a couple weeks ago, so I know a lot of those guys, and I love that stuff. So that's cool. You got your start there, and you kind of stay up on that stuff, or you ever go to races anymore, or are you the flat bottom guys?
I used to. They made some time ago. We were trying to get capsules into flat bottoms because we felt there was just too many accidents.
Sure.
And so I was at a national meeting, and I'm running my mouth about what they ought to be thinking about installing these capsules, and maybe they don't need to maybe you don't need to mandate it right now. We need to learn about how to do that. We had to learn in hydroplanes, and somebody said, "Well, Dave, why don't you build one and we'll copy it?" So I'm like, okay, well, I'm not really involved in that anymore, but okay, I had one sitting at home, and so I go home and I'm sort of thinking about those things, but not really thinking about actually doing anything. I'm at the Budweiser organization now during this time frame. About that time, a friend of mine called me that needed a little money out of a boat that we had raced in the past, that I'd driven in the past. And he goes, "Hey, I need a little cash. Would you want to buy my boat?" And I thought, I'm sitting there going, because they'd crashed the boat and it had a little bit of damage. So you weren't tearing into something that was pristine, at the time. And I says, "Well, yeah," I said, "maybe I would," but I said, "But here's the thing, you have to help me put a capsule in it." And so we built something, and, we had to develop some things, but we ended up setting every record. We hold the super stock record. We hold the pro stock record. We held most all the records with it.
What kind of boat was it?
It was a Starfire.
Starfire. Okay.
Yeah. That's what I won all the, with that guy,
Gotcha.
Steve Jones. He built
he built Starfires. Okay. That when I was at the circle races, there was a guy that had somebody said that a Starfire. In fact, it was a capsule. In fact, they just kind of reintroduced the pro stock class because they're sanctioned with APBA now, and there was 5 boats with capsules out there this weekend.
Yeah,
so
and that's a great start. Minnie Baker is somebody I actually worked on that boat. If you looked at the cavitation plate and stuff, we brought his boat out to their shop and showed him, here's how we did this for that style of boat, and put a rudder bracket on it and the stuff that we'd done to the other boat. So I put a skid fin on it and a rudder bracket, and I did some things to I wanted to make it be a safer boat all around. I felt that, and that's what I told APBA. You can't use a boat that was designed to have like 450 horsepower in it tops. You can't put 1,000 or 1,500 in it and then put a capsule which has a high, the weight in the capsule is way high. You can't put that in and expect it not to roll over. It doesn't have sponsons. It doesn't have an escape hatch out the bottom. It's just there's all sorts of problems there. Yeah. And so that's why I built something that was a little ahead of its time. It was risky, and we crashed it a few times learning how, but in the end, it was running 10 miles an hour over. It was running K-boat records with a super stock engine in it. Yeah. And that was fun. I still got 4 engines in a shop here in Indiana.
Oh, cool.
The boat's still sitting here in Indiana, and that's great to see.
Awesome.
Start to come around. I hope. My advice to all the APBA classes, they need to reduce the horsepower of the engines, and then the safety factor will come down with it. But we have such powerful engines, like when I set the super stock records with my open boats, they made like 530 horsepower. Now they've added cylinder heads and all kinds of modifications to the same classification that, like the last engine I set all the records with, made 700 horsepower. And you go, what do you think? They thought it was all in the boat, which some of it was, but they looked at the boat and they said, well, it's because yours so different. That's why it's so fast. I went, no, it's fast because it has 200 more horsepower than it used to have. And it's got a CNC propeller, and the advance of knowledge of fins and things like that we'd have for 20 years was put back into one of those boats. That's why it's so fast. It's not something magical here. It's too much power was at the forefront of it.
Yeah, I don't get it. And racing And they've set some speed limits. You have the GPS classes and the enduros like 110 miles an hour now. And it's a little sacrilegious to put a speed limit sometimes on racing. But on the flip side, there's the counts are high. Like more guys are having fun, less boats are breaking. Like what's the end game here? And you got to look at the world as it is today and the economics of it and safety part of it. And like, I think you'd rather have a bunch of guys out there racing, having fun than, we want to be faster than the last guy. I think
my advice to them is they got to bring that, like I say, back when we were running open boats, you couldn't buy aftermarket cylinder heads for a big block Chevrolet. You could buy a Chevrolet cylinder head that was better, but for the lion's share, there were other parts and things that could be made available. But mostly people had a Chevrolet part or a Ford part that they'd used that was a factory part. And so the most powerful engine maybe made 750 horsepower. In the Pro Comp, it was Pro Comp or Pro Stock. That's all it made. Super Stock made 530. So my advice is that, put some sort of top end limits on the thing so it can't have so much horsepower that it runs out of its safety envelope.
Right.
And then the engines will live a long time because you got engines that are designed and built these days to make 1,200, 1,500 horsepower. If you put a small enough carburetor on them or do something in the camshaft area or something, you can make something that only makes 450 to 500 horsepower right in the middle of where you need to be. That boat will be pretty drivable. And I mean, part of the problem is, and I learned that with my own, is that when you make a boat that fast, as we can run today, that we're running, 112, 115 mile an hour lap averages on the course, lap average, we're running, you routinely, like the old K boats of the day, you're running 130 miles an hour down the straightaway. The average driver can't do that.
There's that part too.
He can be able to buy the performance, but he'll probably crash it. So the only way to do it is, I think the speed limit puts a damper on it, but I think the best thing for those classes to do is to hold the power back to that 450 to 500 range. The boats will be more competitive. The cost of running the vehicle will be far reduced. The propeller life will go up. The gearbox life goes up. Everything gets better.
I agree.
We'll see if they listen.
Well, while we're talking about racing and organizations, so what? Obviously, you've been in Unlimited your whole career. What's something Unlimited Hydroplane racing as a whole is getting wrong today, and what's something that they still get right?
Well, I think what we've got right is we've got the boats have become very similar. Stuff that that came off the drawing board in 1996 is still a pretty good part. It's how they gear it, the propellers that we developed back then, like say what most people are running are a derivative for that 1994 Fred Leland propeller that is pretty durable. We built a number of things that may be a little better, but that was pretty good. It's not bad. Those are pretty similar. We need to make it a system of starting the race so that the referees don't have to be so involved. I think a guy, one of the fathers and promoters of NHRA, Bill Donor, when he took over the sport, he said, "Why do the referees have to be so damned officious?" Well, it's because we wrote rules that said that you can do this and you can't do that, and so on. And so before the race, there's calls made that sort of tarnish the outcome. In other words, you have the race, and then they come back and they say, well, so-and-so cut off so-and-so before the race ever started. And like we had a speed limit there for rules, and people would violate that. I lost a race that way that, it went for 1/2 of a second, went under 80 miles an hour, too long. Stuff like that happens that you go, geez, that doesn't make the sport any better. The winner needs to be the winner, and we need to have an organized way to start the race. Bill Donor, what he did was said he hated the clock because that meant a way that somebody could jump the gun and get disqualified for that. He didn't want that to happen. He wanted the race to come off together. So we said, let's just use a flag. That way nobody can jump the gun. When we throw the green flag, they go. Made sense. It had its own problems, but made sense. And then we're going to, like drag racing, he thought we're going to earn a lane. position. And that turned out to be where it was a little bit too predictable. And so then we made it so it reverses. And like one of the organizations, the IRL, they run a race off of, I think, points, and then they reverse it. So the fast guy has to be on the outside, and they run another race, and then they put the fast guy on the outside again, I think, and they have to run a race. And so the people that the cream will rise to the top still, but you've taken out, because of the pre-race violations that we suffer from, they've taken that out of it, that they've earned a place. And it's some organized way. It takes out guys like myself that have a lot of experience and do things that are cunning and unusual. But at the same time, guys like me are forcing the referee to make a call. And when he makes it, he's doing his job. We put the rule in. He's doing a good job of making the call. But then the guy that won the race didn't win the race. And the fan goes, what the hell happened there? Why didn't I left the race and thinking so-and-so won the race. And I read here in the newspaper or listen to the radio that so-and-so didn't win the race. Yeah. So I'm not making an argument for any way they do it, but I think you have to approach it from that known that you have to do it in some organized way so that we're not putting the referees in such jeopardy that they have to make so many calls that it doesn't look good for the overall sport.
Yeah. If you had control of it, how would you change that? Or is there something else what's one change you think you'd make?
I'd probably do it. I'd do a few things. If I got to be king for a day, I'd probably figure out something to do with the start procedure. If I was running the organization, what I'd probably do is say, here's the format I want you to use. Figure out how to do it the right way. And send that in the committee so they can beat that to death. That's what's been successful in the past. You find smart people that'll spend their time going through different pluses and minuses of any one idea and beating it to death until you finally beat it into a final version that'll actually work.
Right.
And then you put a smart guy, like we used to put it on Mike Noonan, who works for our team now.
Yeah.
But when we wrote rules like that, we had the crew chiefs and the drivers would get together and we'd come up with what ideas we thought were the best. Because we knew as a group we had 3 votes on the board. So 3 votes and probably 1 or 2 owners. So that out of 10 people, that was a pretty high percentage. So we would put together rules that we thought where the sport needed to go, and we'd beat them to death. And then we'd hand them to Mike Noonan and say, make sure that this rule is written so that you can officiate it, and it doesn't have all kinds of gray area problems or we don't have conflicts in the other rules in the rule book. And Mike would always do that. And then we work pretty efficiently. What we haven't done for years is had that due process that
too bad.
We beat these programs. The H1 leaders need to say, here's what we think is good for the overall sport. Because we're tasked with, as you sit back as one of the board members, this is what we think the sport needs to be to grow and to attract sponsorship. So they come up with those ideas and then task it to people to say, now I want you to beat these issues to death until there are no problems when we actually put on an event.
Yeah.
You do those 2 things, you'll start moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
I'd like to see something that if we're going to have fuel rules and RPM rules, if I'm an organization, if I was running it, I'd have some device. I wouldn't tell the competitors, just don't go too many RPMs or don't adjust your motors where it has too much fuel or horsepower in it. Because that's what we're doing right now. We're telling the competitor, keep it within limits. And people have done a pretty good job. Not that many people got thrown out. Like I think the 11 team got thrown out at Madison. They made a good lane choice. They got out front. They won the race physically, but then they got thrown out for an RPM violation, where we could make a device that would limit, if they went over in the RPM, you could in real time reduce their fuel flow, let's say to a gallon less for like 15 or 20 seconds. So if they went over the RPM, they had to suffer that penalty, but it happened in real time. We didn't have the referee that came in and says, well, you're disqualified because you went over on RPM. That didn't happen. You have a device in there and that has its own set of problems. I understand.
Sure.
But if you're an organization, and you make a rule like that, there should be a device in the way that the organization controls, not the competitor.
Yeah.
And I would do something like that that everything happened in real time, that we didn't go back and blame the referee or the tech inspector or something else, that we watched our hero win the race.
Mm-hmm.
And then it comes back, well, no, he got thrown out. He went too slow. He got thrown out. He went too many RPMs. He got thrown out because his engine went, 1/100th of 1/10th of 1% of a gallon per minute, which you knew didn't influence the race. But yet, as an organization, you have to write those rules.
Right.
But it makes us look stupid if we write those rules. Then the referee or the inspector has to make that decision, and then you look stupid. So if you're going to have the rule, if the organization, you can't have the rule unless you have the device to control it.
Right. No, I love the process you had where, you guys committee beat it to death and you passed it down. So basically you got the vantage point from every stakeholder, right? And which is really good, because I think sometimes in these organizations, you're all competitors, but at the end of the day, you got to understand we're really one. Because if the sport suffers, you won't have any competitors, you won't have any competition. So that part's really cool. I think the other thing sometimes people don't understand is nothing's going to be perfect. Especially in racing, there's always going to be compromise, and you just have to understand there's going to be compromise. We're going to miss sometimes, but we made it 99% right. And 1%, we all got to just shrug it off instead of, sometimes that 1%, it ends up causing more problems, so, but I like your idea. That's a good way to do it.
Yeah. You learn from history of things that you've done in the past, and we've done most of these things.
Yeah.
But you say a lot of times it's hard for some of the competitors that, there's the competition hat you put on that say, okay, I'm a racer. I'm racing the guy next to me, and I want to take advantage of everything in the rule book. Okay. That's important. But then in the wintertime, you have to put that H1 hat on and say, okay, what's best for the sport?
Mm-hmm.
We need to get to what's best for the sport. And that might not be good for me,
mm-hmm.
but if it's better for the sport overall, that needs a consideration. And we haven't done the best job at that. They have committees. I'm not sure that we've given the committees focus on the overall picture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that belongs to the board members and stakeholders that are making this all happen. I remember one time we're at a board meeting and somebody's arguing about this rule and that rule. And in the middle of that, Bernie Little stands up and clears his throat. We got to get down to business. Okay, to hell with that. We got to figure out how to make this all work. We got to pay for all of this. So, let's get down to business. Forget all of that, and there's that too,
Oh, sure.
Manage that. But I think if you're running a business, not a racing organization, but a business, you would, if you were the CEO, you'd put the best minds together and say, you'd give them a little direction to say, here's where I think maybe the problems are, here's some of the problem areas. Think about that. And then people would come back and we say, here's the bullet points. Here's the 3 areas we need to fix in this company. They'd come up with that. And then you'd take that and put it into the rest of the employees that would go execute that. And next thing you know, the business is making money.
Right.
And same thing happens with racing organizations. You have to decide with your H1 hat on is what's the best for the organization. And I talk about like flat bottom racing. What would be the best for that? How do you approach it? And if you just gave them the areas to concentrate, and if people bought into that, things would happen pretty quickly.
Yeah.
You'd fix a lot of things in a hurry.
Great advice. So, it does seem like, in this grand scheme of things, it's in a pretty good place. H1 racing is in a pretty good place. And obviously with representatives like you, it's pretty good hands to be in. So
keep running that play till we get it right.
There we go. Well, I got to tell you, Dave, I blocked off a couple hours. We're at 2 hours and I've got 100 more things. Your experience in your career and it's unbelievable. And I really appreciate you being open and giving me some of the questions, answers to some of the stuff. It's been really enlightening. And I really appreciate you taking the time to come on and spend the time with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for doing it.
Yes, thank you, and good luck with the year. And hopefully, I'll get out to San Diego when I see you and get to shake hands with you and have a great season. So,
okay, well, thank you.
All right, Dave. Take care.
Thank you for listening to Powerboat Talk. If you like what you've heard, please head over to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star review. For more Powerboat talk, follow us on Facebook or Instagram, or visit our website at powerboattalk.com.